Before dawn, the Tower of the Hand breathed like a slumbering beast. Its stones held the heat of yesterday, and the cool of night fought it. And where the two met, the mortar wept. Tywin Lannister woke to the thin sound that stones make when they shrink with cold. A whispering that might be mistaken for a man's breath. He lay still and listened to it, until he knew there would be no other sound. No whisper of a son with a crossbow in shadow. No click of a bolt sliding home. He had taught himself to wake without dream, and once awake to lie motionless, to sort the day before rising. The work began in the head long before the hands took it up. He rose and the servants came without being called. Feet soft on rushes, braziers stirred. The basin set down with a little ring of metal on metal, steam speaking off the water. He washed, and for a moment, the water shivered his skin so that he remembered he had a body. He put the memory aside as he set aside the towel. Cleanliness was not just a habit with Tywin, it was an argument. A clean man could not be confused with the world he ruled. He stood apart from it and looked at it. On the table, the ledger waited open, black ink on thick vellum. A tall candle cutting a cone out of the dark. The quills were laid ready in a little fan and the weights glimmered. Beside the ledger lay a roll of damp hemp twine and an iron bolt with a barbed head and a line of notches filed into the shaft. The hemp smelled of tar. The iron smelled of the forge. A messenger from the guild of blacksmiths had brought the bolt after dark and stood in the doorway, unable to stop his eyes from going to the hand's face, to see if the face would tell him anything of the future. Tywin picked up the bolt now and balanced it in his palm. It was heavier than it looked. The craftsmen called it a scorpion's tooth because they had found a word for it in their older books. The histories used it too. It was not a new thing. There were few new things in the world. The old ones returned like the sea. He read the entry he had written before sleeping. Numbers, instructions, the chain of men to be summoned, names. Randall Tarley to take command at the Mander. Paxter Redwine to be reminded of his obligations with a list of ships lost and ships gained. The granaries of Maidenpool to be surveyed and scraped to their corners. The line that pleased him most was the simplest. The city gates will open only in daylight, without exception. A scratch at the door announced Pycelle's boy. It was not light enough for the ravens yet, but there was a parchment sealed in green wax that had come by night through men's hands and coin's breath. The boy stood with his head down, and the candle drew the veins of his ears in delicate blue. Tywin broke the seal and read it, and then held the paper near the flame to dry the salt damp that still clung to its edges. It spoke of 3 shapes over the waters beyond Astapor, seen at sunset and at dawn, and of shadows thrown across the walls like sails, and of horses that would not eat when the shadows lay over them. It was written by a trader of no note who knew the price of pepper, the softness of skins, and perhaps the taste of his own fear. The man's fear interested Tywin more than the words. The world always supplied evidence to satisfy men's fantasies, but fear moved ships and soldiers. Fear made mistakes. He set the message among the other little stack. Waited. "Tell Lord Pycelle," he said, and the boy bowed and went. He ate standing, 3 small slices of bread with a thin stripe of cheese and a cup of watered wine, and the girls watched him from the corner as they always did, because the nowhere in his face made them anxious, and their hands trembled a little when they poured, and he did not mind the trembling. It was well that people should feel something when they came into his presence. When he was finished, he went to the window. King's Landing still slept, but the river was already working. In darkness, men labor without the sun to witness their effort. Lanterns swung on the river like slow stars, dipping at the piers, gathering to the ferries that would take carts and carcasses across to the hamlets upriver. There was a certain comfort in these sights. Carts, carcasses, ferries. The city might wake, take flame, spew a crowd. But the river would continue to obey its banks, and the current would take men where it always had. Dragons did not terrify Tywin Lannister. What terrified him did not have a shape. Kevin came in as the light warned the east. He never knocked. He had not knocked since both of them had been boys and had shared a bedchamber at Casterly Rock with a window on the western sea. He had the good sense to look as if he had slept and to carry his own papers. "The old men's books are not wrong," Kevin said without preamble, and set down a brown leather folder. The scorpion will throw a bolt hard enough to crack a barn door. Qyburn had them shoot across the yard. It took 3 men to draw the cord. He says he can give us better leverage with pulleys. Qyburn says many things, and does some of them. It is not the tool that fails, brother. It is often the hand that thinks it too fine to learn the tool. Tywin looked at him. Kevin's bluntness was a form of courtesy. Tywin knew the shape of it and did not resent it. He opened the folder and saw sketches in lampblack on thin paper. The frame braced, the arm jointed, the bed with its groove, the release. He traced one finger along the groove. Notched shafts, he said. Grooves along the shaft to spin it truer. The arrow makers think the deep notches hum in flight and may frighten horses. I am not arming them to frighten horses. He closed the folder. Tell Qyburn I will see him at noon, and have Halene brought as well. Ben? Wildfire. Kevin kept his tone flat, and only the downward pull at the corner of his mouth told Tywin he preferred to hear no more of that substance again. Control is everything, Tywin said. We will speak of control. Kevin nodded. And the boy? Tommen will break his fast with me. Send for him. Have Margaery invited. It will do her good to see how a king eats. How a king eats is how his cooks think a king eats, Kevin said. Not quite smiling. He gathered his papers again. We must talk of the Iron Bank. After the foundation stones, Tywin said. Houses do not stand on loans. He dismissed his brother with a motion of his eyes and returned to the window. Light thinned the river and made the shore visible. The black hulls became timber and rope. The men on the decks took on faces again. The day was arriving like an army. Lines set, banners folded and sleeping. Drums silent. He had always liked the moment before movement. It belonged to the man who had decided the movement. He went out when the runner came from the king's apartments, not too fast to show panic, fast enough to show respect. In the corridors, the torches guttered with the new wet wind that had come in with dawn. The Red Keep had learned his stride. He walked through men who stepped aside and women who lowered their heads. He felt the city under his feet. The layers laid by conquered hands, by builders paid their wages and not paid, by kings careful and kings careless. The bricks were full of the dead. They made it a foundation as honest as any oath. He found Tommen in a chair that was too low in a room that was too large for a boy, with servants flitting and a dog asleep under the table. Margaery Tyrell had set a little garden on the window ledge. 3 pots of rosemary, a pot of thyme, a pot of lavender. The scent was clean and strong. Margaery rose when he entered, and her smile was like the scent. Clean and strong, and designed to clear the mess of the world from a young king's head for a moment. Grandfather, Tommen said, eager and a little breathless. He had grown taller. Children grew without asking permission. Sir Pounce caught a mouse. He laughed, and then he was ashamed of laughing, and his hand went to the little wooden knife he wore at his belt, and he touched it as if it would remind him to be kingly. Kings need not account for their cats, Tywin said. He took the seat at the head of the table without looking at the chair to see if it had been placed properly for him. It always was. But kings account for their mornings. Today you will hear the harbor. You will learn to read the water. There is more war in water than in swords. Margaery looked at him with her composed, uncomplaining gaze. She had a gift that some women had, and many pretended to. The ability to listen as if what you said was the turning of the world. He did not mistake the gift for love. His Grace has been reading, she said. On the Conquest. She had pushed the rosemary a little aside as if to make a space for the word. Good. Tywin tore a heel from a loaf, and the crackle of the crust had the same precise sound a broke bone makes. What do you remember, Tommen? That Aegon burned a lot of people, Tommen said, and that some houses bent the knee and some didn't and got burned. And why did they bend? Tywin asked, and little crumbs from the bread made a spray on the table that pleased him with its orderliness. Because. Tommen's brow furrowed. Margaery did not speak or touch him. Tywin saw her restraining her hand. The kindness would come later in a place where it would not be seen to intervene. Because he had dragons. Wrong, Tywin said. And Tommen's eyes went wide and wounded, then brave, as the boy groped for another answer. Men do not bend to beasts. They bend to certainty. Aegon brought certainty. He was not the first to burn a town, nor the last, but he was the first to ensure that when the burning was done, the same hand would hold the torch next time and the time after. Men bend to the future when they see it clearly. Dain. Tommen lifted his chin. Do we have certainty? We will, Tywin said. You must learn to see it first. Your eyes will be trained as your hand will be trained. After we eat, you will walk with me to the walls, and you will name every ship we can see, and you will tell me what cargo it would carry if you had ordered that cargo. If you cannot tell me, you will say why you cannot tell me. Nam. Yes, grandfather, the boy said, and Margaery's smile was in her eyes this time as well as her lips, a small flame lighting behind glass. She liked a direction that could be followed. Tywin understood why the reach grew fat. He kept them at table longer than anyone wished, talking in a calm voice that turned the serving of porridge into an operation and the honey into a negotiation. Margaery played her part. Kevin watched from the doorway and gave the smallest nod when Tywin rose. He left them with instruction the servants would carry out in gestures if not in words, and went to the council chamber. The small council met under Tywin's gaze as if the air itself was a ledger line. Mace Tyrell sat a little too far back in his chair and then corrected, scraping wood. His clothes smelled of lavender sachets and horse. Pycelle drooped. Qyburn stood by a pillar and did not stand out. Randall Tarley had arrived from the south with the night and sat like a sword leaned against a wall. Paxter Redwine had not come, being wedded to his ships, but a letter from him lay open, its seal of grapes cracked. We will begin with food, Tywin said, because men who are fed are less likely to listen to sermons. Lord Tarley, you will take command for the provisioning of Old Town, Highgarden, and the lesser towns between. You will count grain and collect it. There will be complaints. Answer them with coin at first, and if coin fails, answer them with men. Tax carts at the bridges, not in the villages. Do not interrupt the plow. We do not harvest anger. We harvest wheat. Benderante. Tarley inclined his head, and nothing of his face moved. Lord Mace, Tywin said, and Mace brightened as men do when their names are called in a way that sounds like a favor. You will cheerfully agree to everything I have told Lord Tarley. You will sign the writs with a hand so steady that men will think the letters themselves are made of your own name. You will host the Master of Coin in Highgarden for a fortnight, and pretend to listen to him. While you pretend, you will in fact listen, and when he requests men and wagons, you will give him twice the number, and then write to me to complain of the cost. I will write back to chide you gently and urge restraint. You will then send the third portion I have in mind, unasked. You see? We will teach them that you are lavish and foolish, and that your folly is always to my advantage. This is an old play. We will run it until it bores even us. Mace laughed too loudly, then hiccuped his laughter down when he realized he had heard a joke he was not meant to enjoy. He nodded vigorously. Very good, Lord Hand. Very good indeed. Pycelle coughed into his sleeve. There are letters from the north. The Winterfell boy, pardon the king in the north. Men who style themselves kings are kings only so long as the men around them use the same word, Tywin said. Use the word that buys us grain. He is a boy as long as he behaves as one. The Grand Maester fell to silence. Tywin pretended he had not heard the cough. Now, he said, we come to two things. First, the faith. Second, the sea. They are connected because hunger makes men holy, and ships are required to carry holiness along with fish and iron. Holiness is a kind of cargo. Benshi. Lord Hand, said Qyburn, in that quiet voice that seemed always to come from the spot behind his left shoulder. If I may, you may, when you are called upon, Tywin said without looking. He let the silence demonstrate the shape of hierarchy. Then he turned to it. Your pulleys. No more than 2 men to draw the cord. Build a device for the walls that can be drawn by 1 man with a crank. and that can be locked, and that will not slip when the sweat greases it. And show me the arrow shafts that hum in the air. I will hear them. I will decide whether I want the humming. If birds fear them, horses may, Qyburn said smoothly. Birds are not the enemy, Tywin said. The dragon has eyes. We will blind them if we can, but we will not mistake the cawing of a sparrow for victory over a hawk. Qyburn bowed his head. He did not smile. Tywin liked that. The faith, Tywin continued, has begun to feed the hungry with ladles and words. The words are more dangerous than the ladles. Sergeant Waters has men watching the kitchens. No one will be prevented from eating. No one will be allowed to preach without my hearing the sermon first. Arrest those who call for swords. Not by soldiers. By men in plain clothes with clean fingernails. Be gentle. I do not want the faith to be blood in the street. Blood in the street is a tax. It must be spent only when it purchases something the market will not otherwise supply. I cannot afford a purchase now. Bah! Pycelle roused himself. The man who calls himself a sparrow. He will object. Men object, Tywin said. Then they count. If he is wise, he will count bread. If he is unwise, he will count martyrs. I am controlling the oven. He may count until his fingers tire. He turned last to the sea. I will see a plan for the river towers strengthened today, he said. The chain is not to be spoken of, not even in this room. There will be no chain. There will be towers with scorpions placed on their roofs and rooms below to store bolts against damp. The doors must shut, so that smoke cannot find the bolt. Hallyne will attend. I will have a list of every alchemist and their proven work. The Blackwater ran green once and saved us because of my timing, not because of any god practicing in that hall. Our future will not be balanced upon men who raid fire. It will be set upon timber and discipline. Then, Euron Greyjoy, Randall Tarly said, breaking in with a natural right, as if he were adding a useful fact that belonged like a brick, belongs to the next brick. Rumors. He has taken the Seastone chair. Rumors are currency, Tywin said. Pay only enough to keep them from destitution. He has a fleet, Tarly said. Ships are not rumors. Send a letter to Lord Harlaw, Tywin said. Worded so that it reads like condescension from us and insult from him. And one to Stonetree, one to Botley, one to all the small lords. Tell them that if they bring me Greyjoy's head, I will make them his heir. It will cost us nothing. We will carry the cost when it is due. Mace Tyrell blinked. We pay men to kill men we may yet need. We will never need Euron Greyjoy, Tywin said. We may need his enemies. When the council broke, he held Qyburn back with his eyes. Hallyne the pyromancer came in sweating and trying not to, and the smell of fennel and saltpeter came with him. Tywin had a brazier fetched, and the heavy bolt Qyburn had brought laid upon the table. He set the iron tooth in his palm again, and waited in air that had begun to smell of heat and chemical nerviness. Make the cranks simple, he said to Qyburn, not wasting his breath on greeting the other man. So simple a potboy can understand it. Men panic when the world changes shape. I want devices that make them feel, in their panic, as if they are doing the most ordinary thing they have ever done. I want muscle memory to survive fear. Do you understand? No. Yes, Qyburn said thoughtfully. You want the killing abstracted into routine. I want it reliable, Tywin said. He turned to Hallyne. And you will move your stocks under guard, under my men's hands, to rooms that I will designate. You will give me an inventory. It will be checked. There will be no demonstrations without my word and my presence. If any man in your hall lights a fire for his own delight, I will hang him, and leave him hanging. Then no one too. Hallyne bowed until his belly wrinkled into the table, and his long hands splayed as if to catch himself. My lord is prudent. My lord is alive, Tywin said. He dismissed them both, and went walking with Tommen and Margaery beside him, not speaking now of dragons but of boats. He pointed to a barge and asked the boy what the piled shape covered with sailcloth might be. Apples. Cheese. Small oaken casks that held nothing but stones. Shipped to confuse a customs man? Tommen squinted. The wind took his fair hair and stood it. He looked healthier in the wind, and Tywin let himself approve. When the day had grown old enough to begin its serious work, he left the boy to Marguerite and walked into the city with only 2 men behind him and Kevin at his elbow. The gold cloaks knew not to follow like a parade. The streets were wet from a night rain, and ruts held dull mirrors. The smell of the fish market had not yet soured into rot. It was still the smell of sea and iron and the inside of a living thing. Men looked and did not look at Tywin Lannister. They pretended he was a man with a red cloak. He pretended with them. There were ways to rule that did not require a trumpet. They stopped at the Smith Street. Inside, the fire struck steel and made a sound that could be read by anyone who had listened to it long enough. He watched a boy eye a stack of bolts lined like geese. The boy licked his thumb and ran it along a shaft's notches to feel their depth. The apron the boy wore had a tear mended with cord. Tywin might remember the boy. He might not. He would remember the cord. The master of the shop came forward, wiping both hands and then one hand again. "My lord," he said, and his eyes did something between cringing and staring. "We have the thing you asked." "You have the thing I asked for a week ago," Tywin said. "Now I ask for 100. The master made a small movement of denial with his head, and then flattened it into a nod. "We have iron," he said. "What we have less of is quiet. Men who would have us throw down work and take up pike cures, preachments, opinions." Tywin listened to the shape of the complaint, not its words. "Make bolts," he said. "I will send you quiet." He set down a packet of scrips. Sealed. Tax relief for the guild. Priority on charcoal. An order for river ash. The master reached for them as if for bread. "When this is done," Tywin said without ceremony, "I will take this shop off your hands at a price that will keep you in mutton the rest of your days. And I will give it to the boy if he has all his fingers. If he lacks any, I will sell it to a man who has all his fingers." The boy's mouth opened and closed, a fish mouth. The master's eyes flicked to him, and then down. "Teach him not to touch hot iron with his tongue," Tywin said. "I want him to be able to count." Outside in the wind, Kevin said, "You always like to be just in sight of the forge." "The forge tells men the truth about their arm," Tywin said. "Half the lies of the world are told by men who have never lifted anything heavier than a goblet." They left the ring of hammers behind. When they reached the hill again, Cersei waited for them in a shadowed doorway with simple clothes chosen to look like no choice at all. There was something about her face that had been scoured by anger. She smiled at Kevin and did not smile at Tywin. She had learned the economy of smiles at last. "I hear you are arming the walls," she said. "Against phantoms." "My arming is always against men," Tywin said. "Phantoms frighten men. I do not like to waste fear. Your devices will look well." Cersei said. "The small folk will see them and think themselves protected. That is something. But how will you protect them from songs? The faith sings. The Tyrells throw petals. The Iron Bank chants sums. The child listens to all of it." Tywin said nothing for a measured beat. It was often necessary to give silence, as if it were a beverage. He let her drink. "You will not go near the faith's kitchens," he said at last. "Nor their halls. I will handle them. You will not summon Qyburn. He will come to me. You will accept that Margaery instructs the boy when I do not. Your gift is not instruction, Cersei. It was never instruction." Color touched her cheekbones. "High and hot. You mean my gift is to produce kings?" "I mean nothing," Tywin said. "I say what is. If you want music in your court, hire musicians." She stared at him. Her mouth did not betray her. She was learning. He knew he should be pleased for her and his blood both. Pleasure was an untidy emotion. He folded it away. "You will accompany Tommen to the harbor tomorrow," he said. "You will not interfere with his questions. You will demonstrate a queen's interest in ships that carry grain." "Very well." she said, and left as if she had been the one dismissing him. That night, when the city made its proprietary noises, girls who had turned the day's bread into night's bruises, men who had drunk too little and then too much, wagons stubborn on stone, the message from the narrow sea came again, from a different hand, talking of a harbor in the free cities where a woman stood with 2 dragons, not 3, and the third shadow had been a trick of cloud. The letter asked for gold. The letter got none. Tywin read it twice and folded it with very crisp precision, and then burned it. Dreams multiplied in fire. He had more practical uses for flame. The next day he watched the first scorpion lifted into place on the river tower. Men hauled and cursed, then laughed when the bolts slotted and nothing splintered. The arm went back slowly. Metal teeth clicked onto the rope. A man with a scar along his jaw set, wiped his hands, and then took the crank. The arm came down with a stubborn grace, and when the catch engaged, the sound was satisfying in the belly. The city craned its neck as if the machine had a voice and would use it. Tywin had houses cleared in a line that would give fire a path that went nowhere he did not want it to go. He stood on the stones and felt the old familiarity of arranging a field that one did not own, so that it cut a certain way and bled a certain way. Halline, sweating, held out a tiny dish with a smear of his green glass upon it. Tywin did not touch it. He watched the men's eyes go to it and listened to the breath that went in and caught. "Not yet," he said. "Build discipline first. Then I will allow you to pour. Then devour." That afternoon, in his chamber with the window open on the river, he received a man from Pentos who called himself a factor, but was a thief of information, which meant he would be of use so long as he did not believe his theft made him equal to the men he stole from. The man's breath smelled of cloves and fear. "She means to cross," the man said. "She has more ships than she had before." He set out a list in a hand that tried to be elegant and was merely showy. Tywin read quickly, then read slowly, measuring how the names slid across his tongue. Lace. Lantis. A scattering of cell sails whose banners changed as often as cost did. There were names he recognized from earlier wars. Names from books. Names from areas of the map he did not need to look at to see. At the end of the list, a name more rumor than name. A Greyjoy that was not the Greyjoy Tarly had named. "You want a great deal of coin for words," Tywin said, when the man had run down his recitations. "I want my life," the man said, and found honesty. Tywin looked at him, as if he were a chart he had used many times, and found still accurate. "Then take your life," he said, "and take a packet and go to Maidenpool. There you will write me once a month of the price of barley, of meat, of iron spikes. I will not pay you for dragons. I will pay you for carts. If you cheat me, I will know it the way a man knows when his horse limps, and I will have you killed. You may now think about how kindly I have treated you today." When the man had gone, Tywin let himself think about dragons. He did not picture the beasts themselves. He pictured their requirements. Timber for boxes and pens, or whatever a man did with dragons when he wished to move them. Rope, den, meat, fire. Above all, he pictured the men who would stand near them. Men with human habits and human mistakes, among which the most reliable was pride. Pride would make someone shout his name too loudly under a roof beam. Pride would make another someone strike a third man with a fist that would knock over a lantern. Pride would make a keeper sleep among his beasts, because he believed himself blessed. He had never beaten a dragon, but he had beaten pride. He sent for Tommen again at sunset, and together they watched from the river tower as the men loosed the first bolt. It flew across the water and kissed the river with a sound that was almost gentle. The splash came late. Tywin listened for the hum and heard it faintly, a thread in the sound of wind. "If I were a horse," Tommen whispered, not taking his eyes from the water, "I would be afraid." "If you were a horse you would be useful," Tywin said. "Be a man instead." Night came with a proper breeze, and the city slept after much argument with itself. Tywin slept and woke with his mind clean, and the day arranged. He wrote to Paxter Redwine and did not flatter him. He wrote to Lord Hightower and flattered him with the compliment all old houses prefer, that they are old. He wrote a short private note to the Iron Bank and signed it with a sum that would not please them and would not displeasure them enough to do anything dramatic. He had learned as a very young man how to keep the world just displeased enough to prevent hope from turning to speculation. Hope made men rash. Resentment made them careful. 3 days later, the city heard an unfamiliar sound and called it thunder. It was not thunder. A ship from Mar came in with a squint-eyed captain and a tale he had soldered to his tongue. He told of sails to the east like a thin forest, and of the word mother sung by men who were not children, and of men with smooth faces standing in ranks in sunlight, while women wept from windows without knowing whether the tears were joy or fear. He had seen fire on water that was not a pot and not a lantern. His sailors crossed themselves in the free city's fashion. He had a small black scale in a little bag that had cost him 2 fingers. He showed it to the gate officer, and the gate officer brought it wrapped in cloth. Qyburn held the scale with his forefinger and thumb like a jeweler, then put it to the point of a knife and pressed. It was harder than the knife. He smiled like a child who has seen something forbidden and found it sweet. "We will need thicker cord," he said. "We will need thicker men," Tywin said. "Send to the quarries for the best stonecutters. We will set new bracings in the river towers and on the gatehouses. I will not have a rope fail because a mason's work did not." Menachon. He gave orders without hurry, and men went out into the city with them, and the city altered. The smell of pitch thickened. The noise changed. There is one sound a hammer makes when it strikes nails for a roof, and a different sound when it strikes iron hoops for barrels. The city began to sound like preparation. Rumors blew about like ash and wind and settled where they stuck. Tywin did not chase them. He let the wind settle them. He changed the wind. He had the gates opened late and closed early, and he explained it to no one. He went down to the dungeons and had a man with a priest's voice taken out and fed, and then had him set at a long table with ink and told to copy bills of lading with his fine hand. When the man looked at him with eyes that had forgotten how to hope, Tywin nodded once, which is what mercy looks like when it does not wish to be recognized. At night, he read Septon Barth. He read of dragons dying of simple things when men were clever. He read of illusions. He read of the old Targaryen's carelessness and the particular nature of care that men who believe themselves exceptional tend to lack. He did not read the passages where Barth tried to make himself a poet. He moved his candle slowly across the page, and the flame made a little sigh as thin as the skin of a burned milk. He expected a raven from Dorne, and then another, and then none for a while, and then one too many. He expected the Tyrells to pretend fear, and to spend coin the way they always did when fear made their throats sting and their mouths dry. He expected Cersei to attempt something small and wretched with a man who liked to cut open other things. He expected Jaime to watch him with that quiet face that never learned the trick of hiding love. He expected Tyrion to be far away and a problem for another man, if he lived at all. He did not expect to see Varys again, because men like that disappear into their tunnels and emerge to whisper only when whispers make the difference between a hand on a dagger and a hand on a goblet. And then a whisper came. It came not from Varys but from a girl who had cleaned chamber pots for so long she knew the smells of men's bodies with more skill than maesters knew the humors. The whisper was that a ship had been sighted off Dragonstone, with a flag no one knew, and that a bird had flown from it at dusk and crossed the moon like a cut thread. Tywin considered the whisper, and then went down to the armory with no company, and looked at the scorpions lined up like patient animals waiting to be yoked to work. He walked among them, and laid his hand upon wood that had drunk oil and wax. He could smell the men who had handled them. He could see the places where a man had put his thumb too often, and stained the grain with his flesh. The machines did not stir. That was power too. Things that do nothing until the hand moves, and then do exactly what the hand asks without complaint, and without any of the little rebellions the living cannot help. He told himself he would not think of the smell of his father's breath on the day they had found themselves all but friendless, or of his own breath inside the mask of lordship as a boy. He did not think of Joanna. The dead were a poor weapon, unless deployed with very careful timing. He would not waste a weapon before a battle begun. He sent riders to Dragonstone with orders for the garrison that rested on restraint. He did not want a display. He wanted a report, the kind that had measurements in it. How far could a man see on a day with salt haze? How many men could march the coast road in an hour if their boots were soaked with brine? How quickly did the wind change in the afternoons? He wanted small facts, the way a surgeon wants small knives. With them, large things can be done. He slept then, and woke into the third hour with the peculiar clarity that comes when the mind decides sleep is an indulgence. He dressed and went out onto the balcony, and the city was a black sea. And the real sea was a slower, blacker thing beyond it. The wind had turned in the night. He stood without moving and let it find his face. On the far side of the world, a woman woke at the same hour and sat up with the strength of a thought that would not let her lie down again. She was small because everything large in her had been burned to interior use. She went to the window of a palace that had never been meant to house a queen and looked at a harbor that glimmered like the inside of a shell. Below her, in a courtyard, men without beards moved with the precision of water poured from a narrow-necked jar. She closed her eyes and saw instead of the courtyard a table, and on the table, the shape of an island that had never been her home and would be. Tywin Lannister poured wine from a ewer and did not drink. He held the cup as if it had been filled for some other hand to use. He looked older than men thought he would, and younger than his scars suggested. He knew the names of every bad wine. He drank a good one and thought of a man who had taught him not to. He could not help it. Thought returns to its trenches unless one fills them. He had not yet filled his. "Lord Hand," he said. It was an old joke told with a voice that would not let it be a joke. "I am not a lord," the woman said. And she was telling the truth, which is to say she chose to be made of meanings that would continue to be true regardless of what men called her. She had learned that there are names that you carry and names that carry you. And you will not call me by a title I have not claimed with my own feet. She looked over his head toward the sea. He could not stop himself from thinking of his father when she did that. The way Tywin looked beyond people in order to place them in the larger picture. "You will go to a land where titles are the diet," Tyrion said. "If you refuse to eat them, you will starve even with bread in your mouth." He set the wine aside and leaned forward. "He will not come to you in the field. He will wait behind walls. He will not wait because he is afraid, but because he knows what walls are for, and because he has taught himself not to be offended when men call him coward for doing what wins. He will make you angry if he can. He will make you act as if you were not angry. That is harder than acting in anger. He will smell the moment when you are tired of being prudent. He will spend men to buy that moment. He is happy to spend. Men shall." The woman held his gaze. "You speak of him as if he were fire." "He is stones," Tyrion said. "He is ledgers. He is a counting device. He will ask your dragons to do arithmetic. The task may tire them." She smiled, not to be kind, but because she liked the shape of an idea that might be tested. "Then we will tire him first. You will need friends he does not count upon," Tyrion said. "The reach counts for him. The Lannisters have always known how to sit on wheat." "And Dorne?" she asked. He thought of the slow, sad man in Sunspear who had learned to live with his own carefulness, the way a man lives with a bad knee. He thought of the young women who did not know the weight of care, and the way it makes the wrist ache for the rest of a life. "Dorne is a promise made by the dead," he said. "We will see how much the living are willing to pay to keep it." She turned from the window and sat. And when she sat, she was smaller again, and the room grew around her. "I am the living," she said. "They will pay because I will pay." "How many ships will it take?" "As many as you can count in sunlight," he said. "And more. And if the Greyjoy you slights by favoring his kin decides to prove himself a poet, he will write his poem on the sea with your masts." She did not roll her eyes as young princes do when told men will die. She had the consideration of a woman who has seen death, and has learned no one's description of it is as useful as the moment when one must pick up what death leaves behind. "Bring me a plan," she said. "Bring me 3. He bowed because he liked the shape of 3 plans. He thought of his father again, and then he stopped, because he had learned the hard way that there is a limit to how much use can be made of one man's habits. Beyond that limit lies only a shape that blocks the sun. In Sunspear, Doran Martell read a letter for the third time, his gout quiet for once, his patience noiseless and full. He reread the letter not to see what the ink said. The ink said what ink always says, as much lies as truth laid down with the same firmness. He read the shape of the man who had written it. The letter asked if Doran would prefer a future written by wolves or lions or a woman who would claim to be a dragon. Doran weighed the three in the manner of a host who knows his guests will break a table whether he gives them roasted lamb or burnt fish. He set the letter aside and let his fingers rest on the wood's grain. He thought of Elia, and of a skull in a bag, and of a careful boy who watched men and learned how bad the hottest wind can be when it enters a room disguised as news. He wrote back without saying yes. He wrote back without saying no. He wrote the sort of letter that says, "I am awake." He sealed it and sent it with a man who walked like a fisherman and would, when asked, smell like one. He did not summon his niece. He had learned that one does not call a fire to one's chamber when one is lining the walls with silk. Let the young burn where oil is not stored. In the Riverlands, Jaime Lannister rode through fields that had been trod by an army once, and then by a second army, and then by peasants who tried to convince the earth to forget. He had never been much for looking at wheat, but since taking his white cloak back to the city, he found himself looking at things like fences and the way a stream undercut a bank. He supposed this meant he was getting older, or that grief had a way of making a man domesticated. He did not like either thought. He liked the thought that he was a man who could still surprise himself. He came to a village where the houses were so low to the ground that smoke had to argue with itself to find a path out, and there he met a woman who told him men in brown had come to ask for bread in the name of the mother, and that the men had left a sermon and gone on. Jaime nodded, looked at her hands, saw flour ground into the lines, saw that she had cut her thumb recently and kept it bandaged with a clean rag. He left coin and did it without the flourish that made men remember a night longer than they remembered a coin. He camped that night by a stream and lay looking up at a sky that had not yet learned the dragon shapes it would soon have to hold. He thought of Cersei like an ache one keeps because one has not the courage yet to let a healer touch it. He thought of his father's disapproval like a cloak that had been taken from him, and he discovered he was colder without it than he had told himself he would be. He slept and dreamed no dream at the sound of hammers. In King's Landing, a girl named Ellen, who had never been out of the city in her life and had learned to tell noon by the direction of the gutter's stink, carried a pail of water up a narrow stair and spilled some at the third turning. She cursed under her breath and then stopped herself from saying the curse aloud because the mistress didn't like curses. When she came out on the roof with the pail, she set it down and let the air touch her. She had never thought air had weight until she learned it from the roof. Below her, the river widened, and she saw the new thing on the tower, a wooden mouth with a tongue of iron. She could not imagine a dragon, but she could imagine the sound of that mouth when it bit. She poured the water into the cistern, and the sound was sweet and made her want to cry. She wiped her eyes angrily. She did not know why a sound like that should find her so. At Dragonstone, a watchman named Benelar, whose father had been a fisherman, and whose son had died of a fever in a summer that had gone on too long, stood on a black rock and felt the wind change. It came around the headland with a voice like a man thinking of a thing he had not thought of for many years. Benelar knew wind. He had read his life by it more reliably than by any priest's text. He knew from it whether a storm would break or pass, and whether fish would come to the surface, and whether a man should bring his nets in or leave them. He did not know dragons. He thought, when the first shadow crossed, that a cloud had torn. When the second came, slower, and then the third far to the left, he put his hand on the bell rope and did not yet pull. He looked at the sea and at the black thing that had appeared on it, too deliberate to be wave, too alive to be stick or bird. It moved as if it had a purpose that did not include anyone else. Benelar watched, and when it rose, folded its wings so the wind slid from them like water from a raven's back. Then threw them wide again. He put his hand around the rope and tugged and set the bell swinging. The bell began to speak, and men put down cups and cards, as if in a play where they had practiced the motion. The commander of the garrison came up the steps 3 at a time. and the sweat on his face made the winds grit into a paste that looked like war paint. He looked once, twice, then did not look again as his mouth worked to form orders. In the Red Keep, Tywin heard a bell that was not a bell of the city's usual hours. He knew every bell in the city by tone. He had practiced this knowledge as he practiced the laying out of a knife and a quill. He stood, and the men around him stood without being told to stand. He took his cloak from its hook and put it on without haste. He walked to the door, and the men at the door opened it, and he passed through, and the door shut behind him with a minimum of sound. He thought as he descended the steps, and the nervous energy of the staircases pressed against him like heat, of the feeling a marksman has when he has sighted a stag that all the morning's cold and hunger were made to afford him. He did not run. He went again to the river tower, because he wanted to see the city while it heard the new sound. He wanted to see where men looked when they were told to be afraid. He saw the Smith Street turn out as if for a festival, and then quiet again when no music followed the bell. He saw a woman beat her rug harder, as if the beating were prayer. He saw a boy climb a wall to see better, and he saw his father pull him down and then lift him up by the waist so that he could see without falling. He stored these things away. Men would say later that the day had become a chaos. He would know it had become a pattern. Jaime came in with his face set to a place between wonder and scorn, and was wise enough to say nothing. Cersei came and stood and would not ask what it was, because she would not give anyone the gift of hearing her ask. Tommen came with Margaery's hand not quite touching his back. The boy's eyes were a little too large, and he remembered to make them smaller. Tywin considered loving him, and decided to do it in the form of instruction. He always had. "Look," he said, and raised his chin. The city waited. The river shone as if something beneath it had turned in its sleep, and the surface had laid down a new skin. The sky was the blue that always returns after rain. For a long time there was nothing to see but the skin and the blue and the towers holding their new wooden mouths open. Then a shout went along the shore. It went the way a rumor goes through a garrison, in jumps, in jerks, in spots of fire that burn quick and then go out. Tywin watched men turn to look not to the river but to the east, to the open. He did not turn. He kept his eyes on the mouths. The thing came as if the sky had made itself narrower to fit it. It came strangely slow, and then quickly, the way an arrow seems to float and then strike. It was not enormous. The human mind measures by trees and houses. By such measures, it was a small house with a man attached. It was nothing laboring. It was everything at ease. It banked, and the sun slid over its scales and made them the color of nothing he had touched. He measured without willing himself to. Height, angle, the time the arm of the scorpion would need to be drawn and locked and loosed. He did not think of fire. Fire is a result. One must think of inputs. "Hold," he said, and the men near the cranks held with the sudden, absolute obedience that comes not from fear, but from the sense that a man has seized the rope of the world and given it a jerk and made it ring a proper note. The thing passed, and Tywin saw the eye briefly. He had thought a beast's eye would be animal. It was not. It was an eye that belonged to a creature that had the luxury to be bored and curious at once. Its pupil closed like a sleeve. It looked at them the way a lord looks at men who have arrayed themselves before him for a petition. And then it was gone. Gone with such ease that the air took a second to recall that it had been disturbed. No fire. Not yet. Tywin breathed, in and out, and gave the command he had decided he would give when he saw this with his eyes, instead of reading bad accounts in bad hands. Loose one. The scorpion spoke. The sound was the sound of labor completed, and the bolt rose and then fell, and then rose again, in the eye's trick of following a line that is not a line, and the city made a sound that had no name, and then the water took the bolt and made a shape around it. Tywin watched the ripple, and then he looked at the men. One had wet himself. He looked young enough that his mother might still remember his cradle. Tywin did not mind that the boy had pissed. He minded only that the boy's hands shook. He filed the name of the officer who had assigned him and the names of the men who stood steady. Again, Tywin said, and this time they cranked faster. They had found a rhythm. The arm, the catch, the breath, the loose, the hum, the splash. One must teach the body that a thing has already happened. Then one may ask the mind to believe in the next thing. In the palace of the east, a woman set her hand on a railing and smiled without showing teeth. "They bark," she said. And the creature whose eye had bored and been bored by the wooden mouths turned in the sky and came on and then up and then away. A second shadow followed, and then a third farther out. She did not speak to either of them. She spoke to the wind, and it carried her tone away as if it had a duty. "We will teach them new numbers." Tyrion stood behind her with his hands at his sides. He had known what it would be to see a dragon, only in the way one knows one will one day fall from a horse. He had imagined it and told the story of it to himself. The reality had no more to do with stories than a wound does with a red stain on a map. He closed his eyes and saw the river tower and the mouths, and his father's chin lifted like a device taking its proper setting. He opened them and saw the water of a different harbor, and men below like small fish, and the woman with her hand on the rail. "He will not be flustered," Tyrion said. "He will not be awed. He will be alive and busy. And alive and busy is a form of genius." Then Narelle, "I do not need him to be awed," she said. "I need him to be wrong." Tywin walked down from the tower when the shadow had gone and did not change his pace, though people wanted him to. He went to his chamber and sat and wrote an order to Randyll Tarly, and then another to Paxter Redwine, and then another that would travel west to Casterly Rock and require men to move as if they had been made for that very order. He wrote with the hand that had signed 1,000 things and would sign 1,000 more, and if the hand trembled, it did so only with the fatigue of a day carried to its proper end. Cersei came to him that night and stood without sitting. "You did not shoot at it," she said after the proper silences had been endured. "I did," he said. And the simplicity of it made her blink because she had wanted a fight and had previous words prepared for that fight. "I shot once. Anything more would have been error. The city needed to see that the device had a voice. The beast needed to see that we will answer. Tomorrow we will shoot twice, and the next day 5 times, and the day after not at all, and the day after that at strange hours. The beast will learn our habits if we have them. We will keep none." "Bendau, you speak of it as if it were a captain of a rival house," she said, disgusted. "Everything is a captain of a rival house," Tywin said. "Men, women, beasts, the weather, time." Outside, wind moved in the towers like thought in a head that has decided upon something. Ellen on the roof slept under a thin blanket and dreamed of the sound water makes when it takes a falling thing and tucks it under. In Dragonstone, Benelor sat on his heels and felt the muscles of his legs ache with the rightness of a posture learned from a father's father. He counted. He was not counting beasts. He was counting the length of the silence between their passes. He would tell someone, and that someone would tell someone. And at the end of the telling, an old man with pale hair would write a number and hand it to a younger man, who would draw a different number from it, the way a man draws a blade from a sheath. At dawn, the sky was filled with gulls, and if one looked long enough, absence, as if a space had been left for something to enter. Tywin watched the harbor begin its work and thought of rope. Rope rots from the inside. He had learned that as a boy when a line had snapped and a good man had gone into the sea and never come up again, he would not let any rope rot in his city if he could prevent it. He sent men to check the stores and have each coil uncoiled and recoiled. It was absurd. It was the sort of absurdity that becomes sensible if done often enough. Kevin came in with the look a man has when he has slept little and has found his sleep taken for an honest wage. "Dorn," he said, "your letter has been answered." "And?" "As you expected," Kevin said. "They say they are awake." "Then let us not lull them," Tywin said. "Send a gift. Not jewels. Books. Send Sept and Barth." Kevin stared. "You will give them what we read." "I will give them a mirror," Tywin said. "They will look and see something. We cannot decide what they will see, but we can decide that they will spend time looking." "And the Greyjoy rumor," Kevin said. "Another letter." This one from a man who signs himself with a forked thing I do not like the look of. He congratulates us on our new birds and offers to teach them to swim. Let him try to teach fish to fly instead, Tywin said. Offer him coin to sink ships. Not ours and not hers. Others. Merchants. A season of misery. Name it preventive. See who cries and how loudly. We will learn who depends upon what. Then see. Later, in the yard, Qyburn showed him a pulley that could be cranked by a small man and a lever that could be thrown with a finger that did not belong to a strong hand. He had taught the device to flatter the weak. That was clever and dangerous. Tywin allowed himself to admire it and allowed himself to imagine the ways it could betray him. And then he wrote a list of men with hands he trusted and had the devices delivered to them first. He did not feel young. He did not feel old. He felt as he had felt most of his life. Like a man who had woken before the household and was arranging the wood in the fire so that when they came down yawning and asking for porridge, he could point to a pot that bubbled as if it had always been bubbling. On the second day, the shadow returned, and the scorpion spoke twice, and the third shot was held, and the fourth was made, and a bolt struck air, and did not strike scale, and did not strike scale, and fell again to the water, and the city watched and learned to watch with a steady neck. The fifth day there were no shadows, and men began to talk, as men do when a daily thing does not happen, and they have built their fear around its happening. Tywin did not talk. He sent a rider with a small package for a mason in the Street of Sisters, and had him told that if he would close up the old smuggler's door in the west wall with cunning, there would be coin and a small house, and if he would close it with mere stones, there would be a rope. He visited Tommen's room unannounced and found Margaery finishing a story about a gardener who had saved a city with a net. Tywin took the book out of her hands and read the last page aloud. He read without rush. He read with a voice that made nonsense seem like policy. The boy looked at him as if the world made a certain kind of sense while he spoke it. He was not the only man moving his pieces. In the palace across the narrow sea, the woman who would not be called by a title yet stood in the council chamber where the map was painted upon the floor, and she stepped into the narrow sea and then stepped back with deliberate care. She did not look at Tyrion when she did it, and he appreciated the restraint. "We will not tire the beasts," she said. "We will tire the men. We will set them to running from one end of the table to the other until they have no breath for songs. Songs are sung by men who are not in the room where breathing is done," Tyrion said. He found himself thinking of his father as if thinking of the man were reading an old book with marginal notes that no longer applied. He put the book away. "The red wine fleet will come if called. They like wine. They like coin. They like the smell of their own barrels. The Tyrell lady will smile at your boy king and teach him time from rosemary, while her father teaches him hunger. That is a hedge. You may not be able to breach it except with fire, and fire has the habit of burning both sides when hedges are dry. Now, wow. Then we will go where their hedge does not reach," she said. She touched Dorne with her toes. "We will write in the sand. It holds writing a long time. The wind takes it away when we are ready. There is a man there who has spent his life watching wind," Tyrion said. "Be respectful of his watching. Men who have done nothing else know the shape of it better than poets." "Damn see." She nodded, not because he had told her something she did not know, but because he had demonstrated he knew what she knew. It is a small courtesy. It is never small to the recipient. The first true test came with a rain that took half a day to make up its mind. It slapped the city sideways and then softened. The river made the sound of a man with a chest full of phlegm. Men on the towers cursed softer than they cursed on dry days, because they wanted to save their voices. The shadows came not three but one, and it came low enough to draw breath from throats. Tywin had set men down the walls with flags, simple colors that could be read by men who could not read, and when the first flag rose, it did so without flapping, because the rain glued it to its pole. The word went nonetheless. The mouth opened. The arm went down. The bolt went. The creature upset the air with a contemptuous twist, and the bolt missed by the length of a shame. Benelor on Dragonstone watched from a crenel. The way men watch a fight they cannot join. leaning forward, turning a shoulder, as if the body could lend weight to another man's arm miles away. He counted again. He had stopped counting dragons. He counted the time men took to reload. He counted how long the rain slowed them. He counted the number of times a sergeant said the same word and how loud he said it. Later, he told it to a man who wrote 3 numbers on a folded paper and a circle around the second number. And the paper went to a third man whose hair grew like moss and whose pen had a nib like a thin knife. The dragon flamed then, perhaps because the rain taunted it. The fire came out of it like a decision men had spoken of for months and then finally taken. It did not roar first. The roar and the light arrived together, too fast for the mind to make the order of it. Where it touched stone, it did surprisingly little. Where it touched wood that had not been as carefully prepared as Tywin had ordered wood to be prepared, it found purchase in a breath. A section of gallery coughed fire like a man who has put salt on his tongue thinking it sugar. Tywin saw it and did not move. He waited to see not the flame, but the response. The men at that reach did as they had been trained. One took a hook, the next took the bucket. None of them forgot to throw the canvas over the bucket's water to keep the rain out. None of them threw water where oil had been laid. None of them stepped back from heat in a way that welcomes it forward. The flame went out as if it had come only to test the procedure. The dragon rose in a little amused curve, and then was gone. Again, Tywin said, though there was nothing to shoot at. The men drew and set and loosed at emptiness, and the city cheered because men will cheer when they are told that a thing has been done even if the doing had no object. The cheer had a sound in it that Tywin recognized. Gratitude for instruction. He would spend it tomorrow. At night, a letter came from the Iron Bank written in a hand that looked like winter. Tywin read it with a small satisfaction that did not reach his face, and then wrote a reply that looked like autumn. Men often forget that seasons are the real coins with which one trades. He sent Kevin to negotiate and kept Mace to smile in the correct rooms. He sent a message with no seal to a man in the Stepstones who knew how to take coin from both hands and keep his fingers uncut. He sent 2 men he trusted to sit on a hill and watch a road that did not look important. He did not send a message to Dorne that said yes or no. He waited to be waited upon. He dreamed that night, a thing he hated, and the dream was simple. It was a field of tall, dry grass, and he walked across it without sound. And when he came to the place where the grass thinned and the earth showed, there was a pile of books with their pages blowing, and he bent to pick one up and found it heavy with oil, and his hands were soon slick, and he could not turn a single page. He woke and was annoyed at the stupidity of the image, and told himself it was the fault of Septon Barth's prose, and not his own mind. He sat up and wrote for a time until the annoyance drained away and left only its useful sediment: watchfulness. Word came then one morning when the city smelled of bread, and there were no bells yet. From the western sea, Euron Greyjoy had taken ships, and the men who reported it did not agree on whose ships they had been. That was in itself useful. Tywin sent to the Red Wines again, not with a request for war, but with a request for a dance. A movement of vessels that would look like one purpose and serve another. If Euron sailed east to find glory, let him find storms. If he sailed west to find plunder, let him find emptiness. If he stayed, let him stay moving so that the men who might betray him would grow seasick of it. In the palace across the sea, Tyrion opened a letter with a knife that had been borrowed from a man who did not know what the knife had cut yesterday and would cut tomorrow. He read, and his mouth went dry, not with fear for himself, but with the knowledge of the sort of mind that had written the other letter that had triggered this letter. He will not fight a war, he told the woman. He will fight 3 accounts. He will press one here and give there and take there. And when the numbers fall in place, he will walk to the window to watch men claim victory. Then we ruin his accounts. She said, and she was not impatient as many commanders are when told their enemy is subtle. She had patience because she had learned that novelty is a cruel god, best worshipped only when one has brought along offerings of thoroughness. We will land where he thinks you will not, Tyrion said. We will make him spend men to learn we have done nothing, and then we will do the thing after he has convinced himself He has learned all our nothing. We will give him a reason to hold to a wrong conclusion. Dorne, she said again. And this time the word hung in the air with a visible shape. She looked at the map and did not step on it. Send your letters. Send your men. Send me. I will be ready to be sent. You will not go first, he said, because he could not help himself. You will go when the opening you make with your absence is needed. He will plan for your arrival. Let him. He will not plan for the gap your absence leaves. He will not respect absence. That is one of his small flaws. Bah! She did not take offense. She had learned to accept the shape of a flaw and turn it as one turns a knife to see whether there is any spot without rust. The days drew themselves long and then short again as the season shifted in its own ledger. The dragon came and did not come. Came in ones, came in twos, came in circles that meant scouting and in lines that meant practice. Tywin set boys to watching the animals of the city because animals knew how to read the air. They learned that pigeons in the square would rise a full minute before men saw anything, and that dogs hid in the time that pigeons flew and men looked. That minute would save lives if made into a habit. He turned it into one. The flagmen learned to watch pigeons as if pigeons had been made captains of some small precise unit. Margaery took Tommen to the harbor every morning for a week, and then every second morning, and when he asked why it had changed, she said, because doing it the same is a path the enemy can learn. He looked at her with gratitude he did not know how to name. He loved her for giving him something he could do, even if he did not know that was the shape of his love. Cersei watched, and felt the hatred that had become the only thing in her that was simple. And one night she took up a goblet and set it down without drinking. Tywin had removed Qyburn from her hand and placed him under his own, and she had learned there are some losses you cannot replace with a different knife. Tywin rode out along the Rosby Road and looked at the ditches he had ordered dug, not for water but for men. He looked at the little lime pits where lime waits to be thrown on the world when the world decays. He rode with Kevin and with two men who did not matter except for their habit of saying nothing and doing exactly what they had been told in such a way that they made the telling seem like their own idea. He returned before night and sat down to boiled beef and cabbage without comment, and read a note about a mason, and another about a boy who had a clever hand with ropes, and another about a girl who had learned how to listen at the door to the Hall of the Alchemists without being seen. He rewarded the girl with a piece of bread and the rope boy with an apprenticeship, and the mason with a purse and a warning. He closed his ledger and slept. The invasion did not happen when Fool said it would. The invasion began as all real invasions begin, with weights moving, with mouths closing, with water rising and lowering in the same rhythm it has always had. It began with Benelor counting, with Ellen spilling water and cursing and then stopping, with Randall Tarley riding out without looking back, because looking back is waste. It began with the Iron Bank writing 7 letters and Tywin writing 5 to Orty. It began with Margaery saying softly, "No, my love." Not that rope, the other rope, and with Tommen learning the difference with his fingers, and then with his mind. It began with Tyrion placing 3 tiny stones on a map, and then removing 2 and leaving 1 placed not where the eye would expect it. When at last sails were seen on the horizon like a line of punctuation, the city did not scream, it swallowed. The river set down its own load and lifted it up, as if it were helping. The scorpions stood like men at a parade who know the music by heart and will not miss a note. Tywin stood on the tower and did not put his hand on the stone because it is important to remind oneself that the stone exists apart from one's touch. He looked through his city to the sea, and he felt something not unlike joy. It was not joy at the prospect of killing. It was joy at the prospect of an argument that has been building for years, at last being spoken aloud, with all of the words in their proper place, and with all the listeners arranged where they can hear. He had been arranging words and listeners all his life. "Begin," he said, and the order went out in the language he had chosen for this war. Flags, bells, gestures, the morning's bread delivered late to one gate and early to another, Carts that did not go where carts had always gone. Pigeons that were watched. The city moved in a shape that had been rehearsed and was therefore capable of improvisation. The beasts came, and the men came, and between them lay a river and a man born of stone and numbers, and of a will that had been trained like a dog, and had the decency to heal its own wounds and come when called. The woman came, and with her came a word that had been promised to dead men, and waited by the living for longer than children know how to measure. And in a room that had once housed a child king with jam on his fingers, Tywin Lannister, son of this house and that queen, put his hand on the map of a harbor and pressed it flat, smoothing a wrinkle that had crept in when men had leaned and argued. He did not know that this was a useful act, smoothing a wrinkle, making a thing lie as it should. He did it as a boy does things. He would learn, if he lived, what the act means. The invasion had the patience of tide and the certainty of hunger. It began with the small, and it promised the large and the city, taught to stand steady while bolts hummed and water splashed and fire tried its teeth, and found them met, drew breath and held it, waiting to see not who would win in a single day, but which world would burrow deeper into the other, and whether dragons' shadows could learn to be anything more than weather passing over stone.